Well, good afternoon, morning, evening, whenever you're watching this video. I am here for Management 4950. This is the second additional uh, lecture for this week. Since we only had one actual class this week and a lot of material to get through, I wanted to take you through this part in a video. This is an additional video that I do want each of you to watch. But in it, you're going to learn how to use some of the graphs we've been talking about. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a couple videos for you to watch, and then we'll go through some of the graphing work. Okay, so I hope everybody is having a nice, happy, and safe Thanksgiving. And let's go ahead and get started on well, I got to share it. First of all, we got to share the right. There we go. I think I got it this time. There we go. I think that's better. Okay, so we're going to watch a video. It's by Anna Justice, and it is a TEDx video. So we'll just take a few minutes. I'm going to cue this up, and we will get to watching that. Hopefully. If everything works like it's supposed to, we should be good to go here. So let's watch Anna Justice.
Hello, welcome to Systems Thinking 101. When I tell people I am a sustainability science major, I'm often met with a head nod, followed by a, wait, what's that? Now, most people understand sustainability as sustainable development. And in sustainable development, we are looking at how we can meet the needs of present generations without compromising the ability for future generations to meet their needs. Now, today I'm just going to focus on one aspect of what I have learned and applied to my daily life, and that is systems thinking. What is systems thinking? Well, systems thinking is an integrative way to view a large and complex issue as part of a group or system of elements together as a whole. Systems thinking requires you to take a step back and look at the big picture. To understand systems thinking, you first need to understand systems. To understand systems thinking, you first need to understand systems. Now, systems refers to how elements interconnect and work together to form a unified whole. Examples of systems include the human body. The human body has a set of DNA, tissues, cells, muscles, and they all rely on one another to function correctly. A forest is an example of a system. It has plants, animals, soil, water, all to produce that specific type of landscape. An economy is a system. It has a set of rules, behaviors, and institutions that govern how a society should exchange goods and services. Now, systems can also exist within systems. For example, a city is a larger system that could be broken down into smaller systems, such as local government, hospitals, schools, businesses, residents, and so on. Now, there are two key takeaways here. Systems are everywhere, and they exist at various scales.
Go to high school, get my degree.
We were driving down the road and he saw Mathnasium and he said, Mom, I should go there.
Now, systems have inputs and outputs. In linear thinking, we can easily see that input A affects B, which affects C, which affects D, and D is that final output. Since we can more easily process this and identify the cause and effect or causal relationship, we're more prone to be linear thinkers. Now, what if outputs were also inputs in the same system, or another one? Well, then we'd get something like this. You might be wondering, where does it begin? Where does it end? Well, unlike linear thinking and circular thinking, there is no specified end. You can see that there is continuous feedback among each element. In the examples we are going through today, we will be creating these loops and identifying causal relationships. And we are going to constantly be asking these two questions. How are the elements interacting, or the system dynamics? And what is the goal of the system, or the desired output? A great way to begin systems mapping is through the iceberg model. The iceberg model reminds us that what we initially see on the surface isn't going to tell the whole story. Now at the top we have event. The second layer is patterns, and if you view that event over time, you can maybe identify patterns. The third layer is structure, and structure refers to systemic structures. Now let's say I bought a shirt last week, and I bought it because it was trendy, it was at a good price. Well, if we view this at the top layer, there's not much else to it. But let's move to the second layer. At the second layer, we could discuss how this shirt in a year, or maybe even a few months, will no longer be trendy. And then I might buy a new shirt. And then that's going to repeat and generate a pattern. The third level is where we perform systems thinking. Now we're going to use a causal loop diagram. A causal loop diagram is a visual aid to show how elements in a system are interrelated, and we are going to use words and arrows. You can think of it like systems thinking art class. Now, while we started with me buying a new shirt, we're going to take a step back and get a bit broader, and we're going to identify the overarching system as the clothing industry and focus on a clothing company. Now we need to identify the inputs and how they interact in the system. So the clothing company has identified demand. There's demand for clothes. And they have also found that customers will buy clothes if they're cheaper. So then we move to production. The clothing company will make clothes cheaply by outsourcing labor and using cheaper materials. This creates a lot of inventory. And in that inventory, they want to sell it as much as they can so they can keep creating new products, because new products increase customer attractiveness. So this will increase marketing. As marketing increases, so does the number of customers that buy clothes. This generates profit. And profit is a signal to the clothing company to keep making more clothes. So we can draw an arrow straight back to production. Now, if you can see the little plus signs next to each arrow, that indicates positive reinforcement, or an increase. Now, while there are more variables in real life to complete this process, for the sake of today's exercise, we want to keep it simple. Let's make another causal loop diagram. We are going to stay within the same system, the clothing industry. But we are going to build off customers. So the customer buys clothes and then receives the clothes. What's next? Well, we assume the customer is going to wear those clothes. So this increases the clothing use over time. And as clothes are more used, they have an increased chance of wearing out or going out of style. And that's going to indicate to the customer to throw away the clothes or donate them. And both of those options inevitably end up at a landfill. Now, wait a minute. This doesn't look the same as our first example. That's okay. In systems thinking, it can sometimes be hard to figure out that connecting arrow, or what's going to connect the loop. Can you see where we could draw an arrow from one of the variables back to customer? Now, technically, you can make a case for any of those first three variables, but I'm going to add an arrow from throwing away or donating clothes back to customer. Because typically, when we get rid of clothes, we go and buy more, and that makes us a customer again for that clothing company. Now, let's take this example and connect it back to our first example. Well, then we get something like this.
I've moved away from financial spreadsheets with QuickBooks. Everything's in one place.
Whoa. Now, looks complicated. But guess what? You can now walk someone through this. And if you're wondering what this is, well, you just use systems thinking to break down the complex issue of fast fashion. Now, fast fashion is a term to clothing industries that use this type of production to produce affordable clothes through the use of cheap materials. And what that means is there's a trade-off by having decreased clothing quality. By using cheaper materials, these clothes break down faster and they're much harder to recycle. Therefore, we get a lot of clothing waste in landfills. Now, this is an undesirable result in the system, but the clothing company is still meeting their desired output to make profit by selling clothes. Let's walk through another example. This time we're going to look at industrial agriculture. Now, a bit of background is the goal of industrial agriculture is to grow food. It's to meet growing population demand. Now, in large-scale industrial agriculture, they use chemical fertilizers. Fertilizers are nutrients added to plants and crops to make them grow faster, bigger, and produce more food in a limited space. However, chemical fertilizers, in contrast to natural fertilizers, are more potent. So what happens is they are added in excess, meaning we are adding more nutrients than that plant or soil needs. And this leads to soil degradation. That soil becomes more acidic, it becomes less porous, meaning it cannot hold as much water. So now let's try to map this out using a causal loop diagram. So we have identified demand. There are people we need to feed. And so this is going to increase the use of chemical fertilizers. Now, what do chemical fertilizers do? Well, they increase the amount of food that we grow and harvest, or crop yield. Now, crop yield, that is our desired output. So we can draw an arrow back to use of chemical fertilizers. The increase in crop yield signals to the farm to continue the use of chemical fertilizers. Now, technically, this loop is complete, but it doesn't tell the whole story of this system. What did we discover about the use of chemical fertilizers? I'm going to draw an arrow from use of chemical fertilizers to a new variable, soil quality. We put a minus sign by this arrow to show a negative effect or decrease. And if the use of chemical fertilizers is lessening the soil quality, this then lessens the crop yield because crops cannot grow as well in poor soil. Do you see a conundrum in this system? We'd expect that a decrease in soil quality would signal the farm to use less chemical fertilizers, but it actually increases the need. Why is that? Well, remember, the desired output for this system is food. So their focus is growing more food. So if they see that soil is struggling and so are the crops, they're just going to add more fertilizer. And what can happen over time is as that soil keeps degrading, it can be more easily carried away by wind or washed away by water. And what that means is someday in the future, we might not have soil to plant crops in. Now, I'm going to stop there, but this is one of my favorite systems examples because while it looks deceivingly simple, it has huge implications for so many other systems to be able to function. Now, today we use systems thinking to look at the system dynamics of fast fashion and industrial agriculture. In both systems, we saw undesirable results: clothing waste in landfills and soil quality going down. Now, systems are not inherently right or wrong. They have developed over time based on our values and beliefs. And ultimately, as these systems developed, they weren't aware that they might be creating a problem in another system. And systems come with surprises and unintended consequences. The next step is what my major is about: solutions thinking. We are looking at where we could intervene and change the system. This is the equivalent of adding a new arrow or variable. And we hope that we could somehow mitigate any unwanted outputs.
How much money do you spend per month living in New York City, including everything?
$8K the last 2 months.
And what's your occupation? What do you do?
I do finance recruitment.
Heard we have a clothing system where clothes are never sent to a landfill and are recycled back into production? Can we grow enough food to meet current demand while letting our soil rebuild at the same time? My hope for you today is not to solve either of these problems. They are very complex and there is no one solution. My hope is that you can see the effectiveness of systems thinking and identifying connections and understanding why any system behaves the way it does. What I love about systems thinking is how it has changed my perspective. I see the world differently now because I can identify these connections more easily, and I can see the subsequent impacts they have even when it is no longer directly impacting me. When I make decisions, I can see that I play a part into larger systems. By using systems thinking to understand how a system is achieving its desired results, I can make better informed decisions based on my own individual values. I hope I have inspired you to incorporate more systems thinking into your life. And if you're still unsure where to start, ask questions. Have a curiosity to think deeper. Ask those questions that are going to make you take a step back and look at the big picture. So the next time you're shopping for clothes, or buying produce from a grocery store, or even throw something in the trash can, I want you to think of all the steps that item went through to get into your hands. And then I challenge you to also think of all the steps that item will go through once it leaves your hands. Remember that systems are everywhere, and you are part of these systems. You have an impact, therefore your actions matter. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay. Let me somehow get this to stop. Okay, so that was Anna Justice talking about systems thinking, and she introduced us to some concepts that we're going to be talking more about today. The iceberg model, the causal loop diagram, and this is an exciting day. I actually enjoyed this part of the lecture. So let me get our slides back up so we can discuss that video we just watched by Anna. Okay, let me try this again. Okay, so we have to consider the very first event. The event is first considered, not the very first event, but the event is considered. We're walking through what Anna discussed here. She talked about visible manifestations, the underlying patterns, which are viewed next. And we view those over time. That's a consistent phrase in this class, over time. When you're dealing with systems thinking, when you're dealing with systems theory, complexity theory, things like that, it's always over time. You got to consider the trends and combinations. And then you got to look at the structure, okay? And then we go into the causal loops. Or the causal relationships, so we can identify in the causal loop diagrams, of course. Justice showed us how the causal loop diagram is used. She discussed about the inputs. We got to identify the inputs into that system, about what processes take place inside the system. Could be production, inventory, marketing, customer, or profits. Now notice how the elements are selected to beginning the causal loop diagram. You don't identify the elements while you're doing the diagram. You've already identified them. So that really is one of the very first things we have to do. We have to identify those elements. Okay. And as systems thinkers, we need to be able to evaluate every possible causal loop diagram, which means we may have to draw up a few of them. That's okay. Eventually, with enough time and enough experience and practice, you'll be able to kind of just visualize in your mind the relationships. And thus, you can pretty well visualize that causal loop diagram. Okay, so we're going to look more into applying this. Okay, we're going to use Oshery's tops, middles, and bottoms in providers and customers as different starting points for a causal loop diagram. But first, we're going to watch a video about Vlad Tepes III, the original Dracula. He actually was called Dracula, meaning Dracul, son of the dragon. I think that's what order of the dragon. So we're going to watch part of this video. We're not going to watch the whole thing. We're going to try to get enough so the diagrams and the explanations that are to follow make sense to you. So let me stop this share and bring up a new YouTube share. And away we go, I hope.
At Mint Mobile, we
I
like
hate
to do the
commercials.
opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little.
Vlad was the second son of Vlad II Dracul, the ruler of Wallachia in modern-day Romania. Vlad II had won the nickname Dracul for his membership in the Order of the Dragon. The Order of the Dragon's primary goal was to stop the Ottomans from advancing further into Europe. Vlad III was born around the year 1428 to 1431 in a Transylvanian Saxon town. Vlad also had a younger brother named Radu, who would become known as Radu the Fair. Vlad II Dracul seized Wallachia after the death of his half-brother in 1436. Wallachia is a historical region in modern-day Romania. Vlad did not support the Ottoman invasion of Transylvania in March of the year 1442. As a result, the Ottoman Sultan Murad II ordered him to come to Gallipoli to demonstrate his loyalty. Vlad and Radu accompanied their father to the Ottoman Empire, where they were all imprisoned. Vlad Dracul was released before the end of the year, but Vlad III and Radu remained as hostages to secure their father's loyalty. Despite this, Vlad II still supported the Ottomans' enemies in the Crusade of Varna in 1444, which was an unsuccessful military campaign launched by several European leaders to check the expansion of the Ottoman Empire into Central Europe. Vlad II Dracul was convinced that his sons would be butchered for the sake of Christian peace. But neither Vlad nor Radu were murdered or mutilated after the rebellion. While Vlad III and his brother Radu were held captive, they were tutored in science, philosophy, languages such as Turkish, and the arts. Vlad also became a skilled warrior and became the master of several weapons. These years as a hostage would unknowingly to the Ottomans forge Vlad the Impaler, as he became a savage warrior and was quick to learn. During the young Vlad's captivity, his father and eldest brother Mykria were murdered, which made Vlad's hatred of the Ottomans grow even more, as he could not be there to defend them. In his eyes, the Ottomans had taken everything from him: his home, his childhood, and his father and brother, and Vlad swore that they would be avenged. Nevertheless, he would bide his time, pretending to be loyal to Sultan Murad II and the Ottoman agenda. After these events, Vlad would begin his journey to regain his father's seat as the ruler of Wallachia. However, Vlad's seat was now occupied by Vladislav II, who was rumored to have assassinated Vlad's father. Vlad III Dracula would soon abandon the Ottomans and would forge an alliance with John Hunyadi, a leading Hungarian military and political figure in Central and Southeastern Europe. Hunyadi would give Vlad Dracula military support and aid. Vlad still longed for the throne. He amassed a small army of mercenaries with the help of Hunyadi, and he invaded Wallachia with Hungarian support. On July the 22nd of the year 1456, when Vlad was still a young man, he encountered Vladislav on the battlefield, and the commanders agreed to settle the matter the old way, in single combat. The fight was in front of both armies. Then, the two men clashed. However, Vlad was far more skilled, and eventually landed a savage blow on his opponent, killing him. Now no one could question his rule. Vlad had regained his ancestral seat, and would promise to protect his people from the Ottomans, and he would soon be known as one of the cruelest men of the age. During this time, Vlad was described as not very tall, but very stocky and strong, with a cold and terrible appearance, a strong and aquiline nose, swollen nostrils, a thin and reddish face, in which the very long eyelashes framed large, with wide open green eyes. The bushy black eyebrows made them appear threatening. His face and chin were shaven, but for a moustache. The swollen temples increased the bulk of his head. A bull's neck connected to his head, from which black curly locks hung on his wide-shouldered person. Vlad was still haunted.
I'm a big dork and I listen to emo, and I'm dating her.
Why are you doing this?
That's someone I like you this much.
Haunted by his past and the death of his father and brother, and he needed retribution. He wouldn't rest until he felt they had been avenged. He began to purge all those who had participated in the murder of his father and brother, or anyone else he thought was plotting against him. He had them impaled. Their bodies would be pushed through a huge spike until they finally died. Vlad's hatred for the Ottomans was also still in his heart. A group of the Ottoman envoys had an audience with Vlad, and the envoys decided to keep their turbans on due to their faith, to which Vlad commended them on their religious devotion. Vlad then said, "Your turbans shall forever remain on your heads." He then had their turbans nailed to their skulls. This was only the beginning of Vlad's savage cruelty. Vlad would plunder many villages in Transylvania, and the stories would reach Germany, recounting that he carried away enemy men, women, and children, and would have them all impaled without any mercy. Soon enough, a pretender to the throne named Dan III broke into Vlad's kingdom while Vlad was away fighting. Vlad swiftly marched back to Wallachia, and a fight quickly ensued. The result was Dan III's army was completely annihilated, and Dan himself was captured. Vlad then would force him to dig his own grave, before having him beheaded in 1460, in front of all of the people of Wallachia, to which they cheered. Dan's entire army and supporters were then impaled. Vlad, to the people of Wallachia, was not only a ruler, he was a warrior that would fight to protect them. The people saw him as a hero and liberator. After that, he then invaded southern Transylvania and ordered the impalement of all the men and women who had been captured, which was now becoming a regular occurrence. Vlad's sadistic tendencies were now showing more and more.
We're going to watch just a little bit more dealing with the war against the Ottomans, and then we'll get right into what we're working on today with these systems thinking graphs, because by that point, you'll have enough information from the history in order to understand what we're doing. So let's go ahead and finish just a couple more minutes.
During Vlad the Impaler's reign as ruler of Wallachia, the Ottoman Empire was at the peak of its expansionary phase. The Ottomans had already conquered much of the Balkans, including Serbia and Bulgaria, and sought to expand further into Eastern Europe. Wallachia was one of the buffer states, standing in the way of the Ottoman ambitions, and its rulers were expected to pay tribute and pledge loyalty to the Sultan. During Vlad's rise to power, the Sultan Murad II had died, and his warmongering son Mehmed II would conquer Constantinople, which was something that was thought impossible. However, Vlad still decided to defy Ottoman demands, submission and tribute. He saw the Ottomans as a threat to his kingdom's independence, and took a resolute stand against their expansionist goals. Vlad's resistance was characterized by both military actions and psychological warfare, designed to challenge the Ottomans' sense of invincibility.
Okay, I think that's going to give us ample information. Let me stop the share. All right, so now you've got a little history about Vlad III, okay? Remember, that's the individual that Bram Stoker actually loosely based the mythical Dracula on. He took myths and he took some history and combined them together and added some fiction. And he made a wondrous story. However, the real Dracula was this gentleman, this ruler of Wallachia. So let's go back to our slides. Okay, let's get the slides to function. Okay, here we go. So we need to identify each top, middle, bottom, end, provider, and customer. So what we need to do is we have to draw out a causal loop diagram for an element at each level, okay? There are various elements. You have got Vlad II, Vlad III, Radu, the Hungarians, meaning the Holy Roman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, which we could also put under there. Under the Hungarians, we could put the Pope, and under the Ottoman Empire, we could actually put the Sultan. So we have our list of elements. On the iceberg diagram, this is what you do. The visible manifestations, the trends and combinations, and the causal relationships. Okay, so the very top of that pyramid, that iceberg, that's going to be Vlad III. This is the individual that we are looking at, the visible manifestation of the system we are concerned with. The trends and combinations, what is occurring? What is happening inside there? You have invasions made by the Ottoman Empire. And of course, we could go into the part where in his childhood, he was taken captive and then basically raised by the Sultan. Okay, we could use that instead. But here in this particular graph, I've chosen the invasions made by the Ottoman Empire. And then the causal relationships. You have Vlad III, and you have the Ottoman sultans and the Hungarian rulers. They're all kind of related. On one side, you have the Hungarian rulers. The other side, you have the Ottoman sultans. In the middle, you find Wallachia with Vlad III in its throne, at its throne. Okay, so there's your causal relationship. Moving now, we can do a systems graph, which, as you can see right here, I got one circle representing the Holy Roman Empire or the Hungarian kings. Then you have the other circle, that's the Ottoman Empire. And of course, its top would be the sultans. They join. This is kind of like an interesting way of using a Venn diagram. Where they join in the middle, that is Wallachia. That's that border region. There you have other claimants to the throne. You have Vlad III, Dracul. You have the Hungarian kings off to one side that he's supposed to be answering to, and then you have the sultans on the other side. So here we have the middle, end relationship between the Hungarian kings, Vlad III, and the sultans. Okay, now let's go into, that's the horizontal relationships. Let's go back into the vertical relationships. You have other claimants to the throne, challenging the throne. You got Vlad III as king. Underneath him, you got the boyars, which were the nobility. Below that, you have the free workers or peasants, and you have the slaves. Okay, so that's the basic system structure that we're looking at. Okay, so when we look at something, when we're looking at systems, especially where you got two systems joining together and creating a third system, this type of graph really does help out with that. Okay, now the causal loop diagram. We start on the far left of the circle with Vlad III. And you see the arrows showing the progression. You got his subjects. Then you have the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire on the other side. Then you got a feedback loop shooting off to scorched earth. Okay, that was a technique that Vlad employed in his fighting against the Sultan, which kind of makes sense from a military standpoint. Vlad III didn't have the full backing of the Hungarian kings, from the way I understand it. So he had to resort to terror. Now, I'm not saying it was right, I'm just saying it makes sense. And there's a big difference between ethical correctness and making strategic sense. There's a big difference. Okay, so he used the scorched earth technique. He impaled thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. Okay, then you got the Hungarian rulers. They enter back in his life. They're challenging the throne. They're not giving him support. Then Vlad is imprisoned. There's another feedback loop shooting off over there. And we can return back to Vlad III. So basically, we're looking at his entire life in one causal loop diagram, showing how the different elements relate at what stages in that diagram. This is a very simple causal loop diagram, but it is effective. So first, I want you to work in your diagrams and graphs for Vlad the Third. I've given you all the elements. I've given you the history. I've shown you some graphs. Okay, so now I normally like to use Oddco as a second example in this. He's a musician, an entertainer. I'm not going to use that example this time. The reason I use it sometimes, and I'm not choosing to use it now, is I think that Vlad the Third is going to be enough of an example for you to use as a way to get going in practicing these graphs, okay? And that's it for this particular lecture or additional lecture. What I want you to do is take what we've talked about today about Vlad the Third, doodle on some paper, try that iceberg graph, try causal loop diagrams, try these different diagrams out and see what works for you. Now, I do have, and I'm going to stop this share, because I do have, and let me find it real quick. I should have a systems graph that I've used before, and now I got to find where it is. That is by far more, here we go. I found it. Let me do a share. Now, in my personal time, and sometimes in class, I like to use the TV show MASH from 1972 to 1982 in showing this. This is a more complete and robust causal loop diagram. I have shown this to you before. Okay, so I'm just showing you how right now you're starting with a simple version of it, but when you get better at this, you are going to be able to work on diagrams similar to this. Okay, and it does help explain the interaction because every line in here is an interaction between an element, between multiple elements, and every geometric shape is an element. Okay, so I established what type of relationships they have: friendship, romantic, coworker, tension, whatever it might be. And then I put in there whether it starts negative and positive, showing if it's a positive, negative, if it's what kind of feedback loop it is, if it's a balancing feedback loop or a reinforcement loop. So this is kind of a more complex version, but I'm just giving this to you as an example. So if you have any questions about graphing, please get a hold of me, send me an email. You're not going to really need to practice too much in the way of graphing through this class. It's a skill that I wanted to share with you so you could have this skill. And if you happen to really enjoy systems thinking and this subject, you could apply it. And at the bare minimum, if you see a graph somewhere later on in your professional career or academic journey, you'll know I've been exposed to this before, and you'll be able to recall in your mind and do a little research, and you'll be caught up with what you need at that moment. So anyway, I hope that you all have an excellent Thanksgiving. Thank you very much for taking time to watch this.